Welcome everyone to today's webinar interview on weight loss for fertility with Tasha Jennings. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Laura Bowman and I'm the membership manager here at the Global Weight Management Federation, and I'll be your facilitator during today's interview. Before we get started, if you haven't attended one of our webinar interviews before, it will run for approximately 1 hour, and we encourage you to participate by typing in any questions you may have into the question box on your screens. The more questions you ask, the more interactive the session will be, and I'm sure the more you will also get out of today's interview. I would like to now introduce to you our expert for today's webinar. Tasha Jennings is a naturopath, nutritionist, natural fertility specialist, author of the Fertility Diet and the Vitamins Guide, and founder of a successful weight loss program she wrote and developed for a large pharmacy group. Following her own fertility struggles and subsequent birth of her 2 beautiful children, Tasha developed a passion for helping women and couples conceive and carry healthy babies. She has an information hub, Conceive Baby, which provides expert information, articles, webinars and podcasts from leading fertility specialists from across the globe. Thank you so much for joining us today, Tasha. Perhaps to start off with, you could share with the listeners where your interest in weight management stemmed from, and in particular, weight loss for fertility.
Sure, thanks for having me involved. These are 2 topics that I am particularly passionate about. As you just said before, I worked in weight loss for some time, writing and developing a weight loss program for a large pharmacy chain, which I did for about 5 years. So I really enjoyed that. I love helping people get healthier and live happier, healthier lives. And it was really probably a personal reason why I got into fertility was when I was wanting to fall pregnant and we had difficulty, which was a bit of a shock to me as a healthy 30-year-old. I presumed I wouldn't have any issues, but that wasn't the case. And so I guess what started out as a personal passion, I started researching and finding out the best nutrition I could to help me conceive. Ended up, having me speaking with researchers and specialists, across the globe, and I really became passionate about helping other people. I was fortunate enough that I had a background in health and nutrition, and my husband was a cardiologist, so we had a lot of knowledge and medical contacts at our disposal that meant that our fertility journey was relatively short compared to many couples I speak with, but it gave me a huge empathy for what people go through when they are struggling with fertility. So it's great to be able to combine those 2 passions today and talk about weight loss for fertility, which is such a big issue and such a big topic. So,
thank you.
I guess, in general terms, I think everyone knows that being overweight or underweight, affects our health, and of course that impacts our fertility. But, the question I always keep coming back to is why? Why does it affect our fertility? And not only does that, I think why is a very important motivator, but it also helps you understand the how, which I'm going to talk to you a lot about today, and I'm sure you really want to hear about as well. And there's some freebies, as you said, in the chat box there to help you with that journey as well. So I think it's very easy to be told you need to lose weight. And I think I see a lot of patients who come to me after being told by their IVF specialist or by their specialist that they need to lose weight, which is impacting their fertility. But that's a very simplistic statement to a very complex issue. So, because in some ways, losing weight is as simple as calories in, calories out, and in other ways, it is far more complex than that, really. There are hormones and genetics at play, which I'll talk about as well, which reduce your ability to reduce your calories and make it difficult to lose weight. So if you are struggling to lose weight, you're not alone, and we're going to go through some strategies today, as well as talk about the genetic and hormonal components, particularly in relation to fertility. And I guess I'll mainly reference female fertility today, but weight and fertility does affect everything. So it's not just female fertility, it does affect males in a very similar way. So this is my first slide. I guess you've introduced myself. I'm a naturopath, nutritionist, and natural fertility specialist, and I specialise in fertility. And there are various pathways I do that through my Fertility for You program, where I work one-on-one with couples, my Your Fertile Pantry course, which is I'm just developing at the moment, launching in July, which I guess, as it sounds, explains how to create a fertile pantry, and my information hub, conceivebaby.com.au, and my prenatal supplements, Lycia Natal Nutrients. So, as I said, weight and fertility is a big topic, and it's one that I'm particularly passionate about, explaining the why. So I think it's easy to understand why being underweight impacts fertility. Creating a new life requires energy. And if your body has very little in the way of energy reserves or fat reserves, then your body will naturally shut down reproductive functions like ovulation and make it impossible or difficult to lose weight. So we do need energy available. So in some respects, I guess you would think, well, if not having enough weight or energy reserves is a bad thing, shouldn't having plentiful supply of energy to feed this growing, developing new life, shouldn't that be a good thing? And unfortunately, I guess, as the old adage says, too much of a good thing. And unfortunately, excess weight has a similar negative impact on fertility as being underweight. Excess weight disturbs the hypothalamic-pituitary axis, which is basically the feedback loop which regulates hormone production within the reproductive system. So your hormones like luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, which regulate egg development and ovulation, are disrupted. And progesterone as well can be disturbed, and estrogen balance as well, because in some ways our fat stores are almost an endocrine gland in themselves, and they do produce some hormones as well, which can disrupt the natural production of our other hormones as well. And this hormonal disturbance can disrupt our ability to create an egg, or can even stop ovulation altogether, same as what happens when we are too underweight. And so that negatively affects endometrial development and implantation, I guess, because in reduced IVF success rates, we see increased risk of miscarriage, increased risk of pregnancy complications, can negatively affect the developing baby as well. So, and I do get people, my friend's cousin sister, she's really overweight and she has 6 kids. And look, everyone is different. And if you are struggling to lose weight, you probably speak about this a lot in your webinars, but there are over 400 genes that may contribute to obesity or difficulty losing weight. And how this affects you is different for every individual. So some people may be more affected by the impact of weight on their fertility than others. So if you're listening to this webinar, then weight may be affecting your fertility more than others. So it's really important to remember that everyone is metabolically different. Genetics do play a big role. And I mean, I've mentioned quite a few of these here, but there are more factors involved in our genetics as well. Our genetics do impact our metabolism. They impact our appetite and our sense of feeling full. So a hormone called leptin is influenced by our genetics and our sense of feeling full and how much of an appetite we have. Our genetics and our hormones influence the areas on which the body stores fat. So for some, people, that the thighs and hips may be an issue. For other people, it's around the belly may be an issue. Genetics are at play in where we actually put that weight, and that can influence our fertility as well. Our genetics influence our hormones involved in fat storage. So our ability to store fat is influenced by our genetics and our hormones as well. Insulin resistance, which I'll talk a bit about as well, and diabetic predisposition is influenced by our genetics and our family history of those kind of conditions. Inflammation as well, and inflammation, as I'll talk about a bit further along as well, is not a friend of weight loss. So we really want to be reducing inflammation, and that is influenced by our genetics. And PCOS is our polycystic ovarian syndrome, is another one I do see a lot of patients with, and that does impact our ability to lose weight, and particularly our fertility. So there are a great deal of genetics at play in weight loss. So if you are struggling to lose weight, you are not alone. There's a lot of these factors at play that can be hindering your weight loss success. I guess, you know, the good news is that the number one factor in most people that is affecting our ability to lose weight is what we are putting into our body. So regardless of whether your genetics are working against you, which may be the case in some cases, and you do have more difficulty, but the number one factor and the big changeable factor that we can work with is what we are putting into our body. And it depends versus, you know, your hormone balance and things like that of what is best for you. And I'll talk about what is best in different circumstances as well. So I guess firstly, I'll talk about PCOS, because that is one that I do see a lot of patients with, and a lot of women are being diagnosed with PCOS. And symptoms include premenstrual tension or premenstrual syndrome, erratic or anovulations, that's no ovulation, irregular, infrequent, or sometimes heavy periods. So basically the whole gamut of different disruptions in the menstrual cycle, which can cause that subfertility and a difficulty falling pregnant. And it can be categorized by multiple cysts on the ovaries. However, that is not actually a diagnostic criteria. And a lot of women are diagnosed with PCOS, even though they don't have any cysts on the ovaries. And there is quite an overlap, as you probably see with the symptoms here, in PCOS and metabolic syndrome as well. PCOS, you can have depression and anxiety and mood swings, darkened or acne skin patches because of that hormonal disturbance, hair loss, excess face or body hair as well. And a common symptom of PCOS and also of a metabolic syndrome, which is there is quite an overlap in those two conditions. And a common symptom is insulin resistance. And insulin resistance can make it difficult to lose weight. It can influence weight gain and cause us to gain weight, and it influences cravings. And of course, you know, it's very difficult to lose weight when we are having appetite cravings, and particularly sugar cravings when it comes to insulin resistance. So to talk about the role of insulin in the body, I think it's really important to understand what insulin is doing in particular. I mean, I'll reference PCOS, but this can happen in a lot of women. And a lot of women are undiagnosed PCOS or may have syndromes which fall under some of the umbrellas, and this includes insulin resistance. So this is something I do see a lot in my patients, particularly in overweight patients, is some degree of insulin resistance. So I'm going to go through, I guess, the whys of why insulin resistance affects fertility, and particularly weight in fertility, and also the hows, which I think is really important, as to how to overcome that, because there is a bit of a vicious cycle. So basically, I mean, every cell in our body uses sugar for energy, and particularly the glucose molecule. And this glucose can't get into the cell on its own. Basically, it needs a buddy to I guess, hold its hand and take it through the gate and get into the cells. So this is quite a good chart. I think it's an easy description of what's going on in the body when sugar goes in, and why insulin resistance disrupts this and causes issues like sugar cravings. So basically, we have high blood glucose. The pancreas releases insulin, which grabs onto those glucose molecules, and it holds it hand and it takes it into the cells, where it gives us that hit of energy. We feel good, and our normal blood sugar is achieved, and our blood sugar goes back down again. And that model is very effective in keeping our blood sugar where it needs to be. And it is very important that our blood sugar does remain stable at all times. And this is probably something you have spoken about in previous webinars. So there is also the other side of the channel, that our body is able to increase our glucose levels in our bloodstream when it's necessary. So when our blood sugar drops, the body produces glucagon, which spurs the liver to release that stored glucose that we have to stabilize that blood sugar. And now this cycle, as you can see here, is very effective in when it's working at its optimum. But unfortunately, the foods that we are eating, and also our predisposition to insulin resistance, and our cells being insulin resistant to that insulin taking the sugar into cells, can play a role in disrupting that cycle. So when you eat a high sugary or starchy meal, you immediately get that high spike in blood sugar, and the pancreas, I guess, acknowledges that spike by releasing the insulin and grabbing onto the blood sugar. But often with those spikes, the insulin can't get there quick enough, and there is a resistance. So the body needs more and more insulin to be able to take it into cells. So you get this massive spike, and then you get all this flood of insulin release because the cells are resistant, and then you get this massive drop, I guess. And the pancreas may not have time to respond to this massive drop. So it might not have time to release some of that stored glucose. So what happens then is you get sugar cravings. So basically what this tells you when you have insulin resistance is you are more prone to sugar cravings because the body isn't regulating the cycle properly. So which means you are hungry even when you have eaten sufficient calories, which makes it very difficult to lose weight. So obviously feeling hungry all the time, even when you've eaten plenty of calories, is really not conducive to weight loss. So I'll explain again, this is something you've probably talked about a bit in glycemic index and glycemic load. It's really important for women with PCOS or metabolic syndrome to improve their fertility and stabilize their blood sugar levels. So glycemic index is basically a ranking of carbohydrate foods, particularly on how they affect blood glucose. So how much insulin is required to grab onto that sugar and take it into the cells, and what kind of a load it puts on that insulin and glucagon cycle that we were speaking about before. So what you want to be looking at is low glycemic index foods, and a recommendation proportion: low glycemic index falls under 55, moderate is 56 to 69, and high GI foods are over 70. And recommendations per meal, you want to get as low as possible, basically, but under 45 is what you'd be wanting to aim for per meal if you are struggling with insulin resistance and PCOS and fertility issues. Because high GI foods really do place a heavy load on that insulin glucagon cycle. They had that big spike in blood sugar, followed by that big drop in blood sugar, which causes the sugar cravings again. Whereas, as you can see, low GI foods, or those foods under that, around that 55 to 45 GI marker, they actually have a slower release of blood sugar. So it means there isn't the demand on insulin. So what that happens is we feel fuller for longer and we get less cravings. So the food we are eating satisfies us for longer, which is really what we want when we're aiming for weight loss. We want foods that are going to fill us up, give us the nutrients we need, and fill us up for longer. So have that sustained release of energy, which is really important. So I don't like to focus too much on numbers. I'm not big on calorie counting. Even when I was, working in weight loss, I don't like things that are difficult to maintain long term. So when I talk about the glycemic index, it's really something that I like to use as a reference. But what it is based on is it's based on how refined the carbohydrate is. So whether it's processed flour or you've got the whole grain and the husk already there makes a big difference into the GI. The chemical structure of the carbohydrate and the physical structure of the carbohydrate. So again, whether that has the husk already on it, is a whole grain, or it is broken down and refined. How the carbohydrate is prepared, and I'll show you a slide in a minute about the different preparations. So whether it's raw or whether it's cooked or whether it's mulched or pulped, that makes a big difference in the GI of foods. The fat component of carbohydrate, and I talk a lot about fat in relation to fertility. The bottom line is I like to people not to be scared of fat. Fat is not the enemy of weight loss, and certainly not the enemy when it comes to fertility. You actually want plenty of your good fats, which are your monounsaturated healthy fats like your salmons and avocados. Those kind of fats are used by every single cell in the body to create healthy cell walls. And when you are wanting to create a new life, you're creating plentiful new cells, and you really want a healthy, abundant supply of these essential fatty acids and good fats. So monounsaturates and polyunsaturates are really what you want to be aiming for. Yes, decrease your intake of saturated fat, but even small amounts of saturated fat, you probably want to aim for around less than 8% of your diet being, or fats in your diet being, in the form of saturated fats, but particularly vegetarian sources, like your coconut oils and things like that. What they do is they reduce the GI of foods. So adding a certain amount of fat to your foods, as we say, the fat component of the carbohydrate. So when you are looking at a stir fry, or where you're having a grain salad or something like that, adding some olive oil, adding some coconut oil to your stir fry, adding a certain portion of fat will actually reduce the glycemic index of the foods you are eating. So you can work in combination to reduce some of these high GI foods by adding a fat component, and a good fat component. The good thing about fat is it's really filling too. It's also very calorie laden. So again, we don't want to overdose on these fats, but definitely incorporating some good fats in preference to high carbohydrate meals can have a great effect on your weight loss and your fertility and your feelings of fullness. And also the protein. So fat and protein and fiber, they all lower the glycemic index of foods. And I'll just go through here. I think this is a good example that I got from the glycemicindex.com website. This is just reference carrots, but this, is across a lot of different foods. And as you can see here, the GI of the foods varies greatly depending on how they're served. So when you have your carrots that are just raw, whole carrots, they have a very low glycemic index. That's the lowest glycemic index. So when you have them peeled and boiled, that gets higher. If you have them peeled and then chopped up, that gets higher again. And if you peel and boil them and grind them to a smooth paste, so again, this doesn't take much chewing, it doesn't take much digestion, it's got a very high uptake of sugar, because basically you've pulverized the food and you've taken out the sugar components. That's very rapidly metabolized into your system. And I like to reference this, particularly in relation to people having a lot of juices and things like that, which again are very healthy. But for weight loss, I find juices not very conducive to weight loss. So what you're doing in a juice, as you can see by these glycemic index list, is basically you're pulverizing the food, and you're really actually taking out the sugary component, and you're making what possibly would be a low GI food, like your carrots here, and turning them into a high GI food. So you really want to be eating your food in their whole state and as raw as possible, or lightly cooked. The more refined it gets, and you obviously get even more refined again when we're talking about processed foods, even the structure is broken down further. So this is, as you can see, looking at a whole food, you can actually increase the glycemic index of how you eat a whole food, but also even more so when we're talking about processed foods as well, because the processing can even, pulverize it to a greater degree than we can here. So glycemic index is a really important factor to consider. But the main thing I like to look at, and I'll just go back to this slide, is this structure here. So instead of, looking through a glycemic index book every time you want to eat a food, really just think about how refined is the carbohydrate. Is it in its whole state? Does it still have the skin and the husk? Is it got all its fiber component? What is the physical and chemical structure? How am I preparing the carbohydrate? So is it really overly cooked? Is it pulverized to a smooth paste? What fibrous component is there naturally within there? And again, when we're talking about whole grains, they naturally have all the husk and the outer fiber that come with them. When we're talking about white flours, all of that husk has been removed. So we're getting just that pure form, which is spikes the GI. The fat component of the carbohydrate. And again, if you want to lower the GI of your meals, add some fat component to it. Your healthy fats ideally, not your saturated fats like your butters, but your olive oils. And I'll talk about the Mediterranean diet a bit later on as well. But olive oils that are very, very good for lowering the GI of food, helping us feel fuller for longer, and have some great effects on the health of our cells as well and our general fertility. So glycemic index is one side of things and glycemic load is the other. And basically the glycemic load is a combination of both the quality, so the GI, and the quantity of the carbohydrate. So basically it's an equation that looks at the GI plus the amount. So just because a food's low GI doesn't mean you can eat huge amounts of it. So the glycemic load comes into play there. But although, again, I like to go through the why so that you get a good understanding of why the GI and the GL exists and how they work. But this is what I always come back to. If you eat foods in their whole state as much as possible and eat seasonally as much as possible, you will be getting foods naturally low GI. Because as you can see here, they already have, you can see the fibrous component almost. They have the skin on them. They have all the cofactors for all the nutrients to optimize absorption in there as well. So even if you disregard everything I've said about the low GI and GL components, focus on eating whole foods and you will be eating foods which are naturally low GI and low GL. So avoid foods with a barcode as much as possible. Eat seasonally where possible to optimize the nutritional intake. I think, these days we wouldn't even know what's in season a lot of the time because, if the grapes aren't in season, they ship and freeze and store them and then they come from America and we wouldn't really know what's in season these days. So going to your farmer's market, being aware of what's in season can make a huge difference in the nutrients that you're providing your body. And the more nutrients you can provide obviously really supports fertility. And with patients, I often go through, just a simple color checklist. Getting them to eat different colors all the time has a real big impact on your nutrient absorption and the nutrients you're providing through your diet. So getting a plentiful supply of lots of different foods as well. But, when it comes to PCOS and hormonal disturbances, it's easier said than done to incorporate a diet that is enough to lower that insulin resistance which is occurring in the body. So I work with patients on herbal support and nutritional support as well, and I'll cover just a few of these here. There are a lot of others that I use, but these are just quite common ones that you can probably find yourself that support the hormone balance and also support sugar cravings and that insulin resistance, that vicious cycle of the cravings and spikes. So cinnamon, and I love working with spices in general, but cinnamon has been shown to greatly reduce insulin resistance in women with PCOS. It helps to reduce the sugar cravings in general, but particularly women with PCOS. You can get that in tablet form or liquid, or even just adding cinnamon to your smoothies and enjoying it through your foods is a really great way to get more cinnamon in your diet and help your body better manage sugar. Gymnema is a herb which is used for centuries actually to support insulin production by the pancreas, which is obviously very important in insulin resistance, and it helps to slow the absorption of sugar into the intestine. So instead of getting that spike that we saw before when we're looking at that cycle, Gymnema helps to slow that sugar release and support the role of insulin as well. Maca is like a superfood. It's a powder, again, put that in smoothies, sprinkle it over cereals. It helps, it's very nourishing, and again, helps you maximize your nutritional intake so that your body doesn't get those cravings as well. I mean, if we aren't getting a plentiful supply of all our nutrients, our body does generally have less cravings. If our body needs certain nutrients, of course, it's going to crave more food to try and get those nutrients if we aren't supplying them. So really important to get plentiful supply of nutrients. That's just a great way to boost your nutritional intake. And then I look at hormonal support as well. And these are things I recommend, seeing someone, your natural fertility specialist or someone like myself to get more unique support with, where we can do hormone testing and work out your specific hormone balance that may be affecting your fertility and your weight. But licorice root and white peony are a combination that I use quite a lot in women with PCOS. Licorice root supports healthy hormone production and insulin regulation. And white peony is a great herb to help lower testosterone, which can be an issue in women with PCOS, and promote circulation to the reproductive system as well, which is really important. We want to be doing as much nourishing as we can during that time. It also helps with pain and things like that, which come hand in hand with PCOS. Donquai is another herb that I use, which supports blood flow to the reproductive system. Again, it's a uterine tonic, and it does help to regulate those menstrual cycles, which are often very imbalanced during PCOS. They can have very irregular cycles, infrequent or anovulation, as I spoke about before. And it's really important to regulate the cycles when we are looking at fertility, particularly, I work with a lot of women who are going through IVF, but if you are trying to conceive naturally, you only have a 24-hour window from when that egg is released at ovulation, as it travels down the fallopian tube and will naturally die off. So you really need plentiful, know when that window is, that 24-hour window is, and you need sperm within the reproductive system for conception to be even possible. So if you are having irregular cycles, you don't know when or if you are ovulating, in some cycles, that can make it incredibly difficult to conceive due to no other factors. You might have healthy egg and healthy sperm and healthy uterus, but the timing is just not there, because some months you're not ovulating at all, so there is no chance of conception. Other months your ovulation may be all over the place. So, and I have some webinars and podcasts at my website, tashajennings.com, that I go through your fertile window and helping to work out when your fertile window is. But I work a lot with women on helping to regulate their cycles. Vitex is another herbal support, which is really great for women with PCOS. Helps support progesterone production, which is one of the #1 pregnancy hormones, and can help to regulate the cycle. So understanding when you're ovulating and knowing when that is, so that can help support that regulation. Schisandra is a liver tonic and also supports the immune and nervous system, which can be a big component as well. And omega-3, I spoke about, briefly before, the importance of fats, and omega-3 is one of those essential fatty acids. And they're called essential fatty acids because our body needs them for survival, but we do not produce them. Our body doesn't produce these essential fatty acids. We need to get them from our diet. So getting a plentiful diet supply of omega-3 is very important. Now, endometriosis is another one I like to talk about, because I do see a lot of patients with both PCOS and endometriosis, and both of them do have weight loss or weight as a factor involved in them. Now, for endometriosis sufferers, endometriosis, if you're not aware of the condition, is basically when the endometrial tissue is displaced. So instead of just being found within the uterus, within the endometrium, it can be found actually anywhere in the body, but most commonly around the fallopian tube, sometimes on the bowel, and the outer walls of the uterus. So it's basically in places where it shouldn't be. And although it is not within the endometrium, it still bleeds and responds to hormones in the same way as the endometrial tissue within the lining of the uterus. So it still bleeds each month, it still sheds each month. And unfortunately, this shedding each month in places where it shouldn't be can lead to a buildup of scarring, which definitely affects fertility, can cause blockages. And the #1 thing it can cause is inflammation, which is very much, as I was saying, inflammation is not the friend of weight loss. So you really want to be reducing inflammation, which I'll talk about in a moment as well. But endometriosis is categorized by severe period pain, and it may last all month long, or it may just be around your period. Lower abdominal pain or back pain as well. Heavy bleeding and or clotting. I see most of my women with endometriosis do have very heavy bleeds and clotting. Either abnormally short or abnormally long cycles, and abdominal swelling as well is a characteristic of endometriosis. And premenstrual syndrome, premenstrual tension, painful intercourse, and of course infertility, which goes alongside that as well. And endometriosis is quite a common condition. It affects about 1 in 10 Australian women. And because it unfortunately, I mean, some women are aware that they have the condition when they come to see me. A lot of women are actually not aware that they have endometriosis until they go to fall pregnant. Because, you know, I'm passionate about providing more education around our fertility cycle and our fertility health and our menstrual cycle earlier in life, because we really have no means by which to judge what is normal. So a lot of girls may be putting up with these very heavy menstrual bleeds, very heavy menstrual cycles, and really just understanding that as their normal. And really no amount of pain is truly normal, whether it's related to your menstrual cycle or anything else. So I really try to encourage women and educate women on their cycle and what is normal or what is healthy, and to help to rectify those issues earlier on, because unfortunately the average time to diagnosis for a woman struggling with endometriosis is around 9 years. So that is a long time to be struggling with these heavy bleeds, with this clotting, for 9 years before it's actually diagnosed. And that's generally, the diagnosis is generally by laparoscopy. Because they actually go in and they can see where the adhesions are or the endometrial tissue is, and that's when the diagnosis is. But often this diagnosis doesn't occur, as I was saying, until they want to go to conceive, until they've been trying for perhaps 12 months. They go to see a specialist who does some investigative tests, and they see that they have endometriosis. And by that time, there can be a lot of scarring build up, a lot of adhesions build up because of that continual bleeding and shedding. And because this has been left untreated for some time, there can be a lot of build-up of inflammation and scarring, which can definitely, unfortunately, hinder fertility. The other thing I like to get on top of endometriosis as soon as possible is a lot of women who have had these issues earlier in their life and had these heavy bleeds and things like that are put on the pill, which is excellent for regulating their cycles. But then when they actually go to conceive and they go off the pill, all these symptoms come back. And weight is a particular issue in endometriosis, because endometriosis is an estrogen-dependent condition. So most women who have endometriosis have what's called estrogen dominance. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean they have excess estrogen, although that is often the case, but it means they have a dominance of estrogen comparative to progesterone and testosterone, so the other levels. So instead of being in balance, they have a plentiful supply of estrogen compared to their other hormones. So it can be normal estrogen and low levels of the other two, and excess of estrogen and normal levels of the other hormones, but there's generally a dominance of estrogen. And by being overweight and having an excess of fat reserves, as I was saying, fat reserves are, you know, to some degree, an endocrine gland of their own, and they will produce their own estrogen, which can exacerbate endometriosis, which is an estrogen-dependent condition, and the chronic inflammatory state, which is caused by that build-up and that shedding and that scarring and that bleeding. So it can make it very difficult to lose weight because you have that inflammatory process going on. And again, the weight contributes to the endometriosis and infertility. So it can be a vicious cycle until you actually break that cycle. And we can do that through dietary interventions as well as herbal, lifestyle and nutritional support as well. So for endometriosis, I mean, the low GI, low GL components are, I guess, always beneficial for any type of weight loss. But for endometriosis, my focus with patients is to reduce the inflammation, which can help with the weight loss and also obviously improve fertility and general health as well. So you want to be looking at a low allergy diet, avoiding gluten and dairy. Gluten and dairy are two fairly hard molecules for anyone to digest. So gluten and lactose, which is the molecule found in dairy, which is difficult for people to break down. And even more so, if you have any issues with inflammation, this can actually exacerbate that, because it's actually hard for the body to break down and causes a lot of energy for the body to actually break down these two nutrients. So amines are another one that I get women with endometriosis to avoid. Amines foods are your foods which are basically aged. So your blue cheeses or anything which has been purposefully aged can contribute to endometriosis and that inflammatory process as well. Red meat, again, any kind of inflammatory condition from endometriosis to rheumatoid arthritis, you really want to be reducing the intake of red meat, which can promote inflammation. And organic, wherever possible. I often get asked this in relation to weight loss or fertility, you know, is organic really worth it? And when it comes to weight loss and fertility, it certainly is, in that, particularly for fertility, anything with a high pesticide load, this has been shown in male fertility and in female fertility, women and men who are consuming foods with a high pesticide load. And unfortunately, the pesticides in our food these days are there throughout the growing process. So you can't, unfortunately, just get the fruit and scrub it off the outside and wash all the pesticides off. They are, you know, absorbed throughout the growing process of our foods. I saw a little skit. It was actually not to do with fertility or weight loss at all. It was actually on Play School with my kids, but a great description of how pesticides are absorbed. They had a celery stick, and they popped the celery stick into the glass, which was filled with, you know, different food dyes. And what you saw straight away was that these food dyes, they just absorb straight up through the celery, and the whole celery stick turns blue or turns red or whatever the food coloring in there was. And that's what's happening when our food is growing in soil which has these pesticides in there as well. And that has been found to negatively impact fertility and also negatively impact weight loss, because it promotes inflammation. These pesticides are not chemicals that our body is used to dealing with, so it can aggravate inflammation and also the immune system, both of which play a role in both endometriosis and ability to lose weight. So ideally organic wherever possible. If you can't go organic all the time, Google the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen. You may have heard of that before, but basically this is a list that's produced to show the highest pesticide-laden foods versus the Dirty Dozen, which is, I mean, the Clean 15, which is the least pesticides. So the Clean 15 have less pesticide exposure versus the Dirty Dozen, which has the most pesticide exposure. How this is generally judged, is a good way to look at the foods without even looking at those lists, is the more porous the fruits and vegetables are, the more pesticides they're going to absorb. So, you know, your foods like your strawberries, your grapes, your blueberries, that are quite porous, and the celery, obviously, as referenced, they are going to absorb a lot of the pesticides throughout the growing process. Whereas your other fruits and vegetables, even like bananas and watermelon, which are grown with that tough outer layer and that thick skin, have a lower pesticide load. So reducing your pesticide load wherever possible reduces the inflammatory process, which is not conducive to weight loss, and also can inflame endometriosis, which is an inflammatory process in general. So following a low inflammatory diet, organic wherever possible. Avoid storing foods and drinks in plastics. And this is, again, I guess, similar to the pesticides. Plastics, particularly, you probably heard of bisphenol A or BPA, is found in quite a lot of plastics, and it's leached into the foods, and it's almost ubiquitous in everybody. Contains, you know, has in our body a certain level of these BPA, and these, well, they're actually called xenoestrogens, BPA, and xenoestrogens actually function very similarly to our body's own natural estrogens. So they bind to the same receptor sites, and they can actually disrupt the hormone balance, which of course influences our fertility if we're getting a disruption in the hormone balance, and can affect our ability to lose weight as well, because it affects the hormone balance, and hormones are very greatly linked to weight loss as well. So it can be a vicious cycle. So the cleaner that we can eat, the better. And even plastics that now say BPA free, often what they're putting back in instead of the BPA is bisphenol S, which studies are now showing may be just as detrimental as the bisphenol A. So avoiding plastics wherever possible for both weight loss and for fertility health. You want to be using glass if possible for your drinks and for your food, particularly heated foods. So if you are storing leftovers or anything like that, you really want to be putting glass containers and drink bottles as well, using, you know, the stainless steel or glass drink bottles wherever possible, and certainly not leaving drink bottles in the sun. Any sort of heat on the plastics are going to leach those plastics into the food more than they normally would. So just be mindful of that. Obviously, you know, I still buy my, you know, bottle of water at the shops and things like that, but be mindful that you are avoiding plastics as much as possible when you are storing foods or drinks. And again, I'll come back to this slide. I mean, even if you ignore all of the things I was saying about the different inflammatory processes and things like that, if you come back to eating seasonal food with a focus on fruits and vegetables, you are going to be doing a great service for both weight loss and your fertility health. So always come back to getting your food fresh from the source as much as possible. You know, growing it in your backyard would be great. I'm not a great gardener, I do try, but I love the farmer's market. So getting your food as fresh as possible. And if you are shopping in the supermarket, you know, a trick that, you know, I like to use is shop in the outside aisles. You know, notice the inside aisles are where all the bad stuff is, really. All your chips and your snacks and even your processed cereals and things like that. All the stuff with the barcodes in the inside aisle. So really shop most of your shopping, if you are going to the supermarket, around the outside aisle. So really looking at your fruit and veg, your dairy, your frozen foods, instead of on the inside. So again, endometriosis is quite a serious condition, particularly for women who have had it a long time. Just treating it through diet is often not enough on its own. And these sort of inflammatory supports can help to improve fertility and also improve the weight loss, which can then improve fertility on its own as well. So turmeric, you may have heard of. It's getting quite a lot of publicity lately. You know, turmeric lattes you can even get at your coffee shops these days, but it is a great alternative to caffeines. It's anti-inflammatory and it supports detoxification pathways. Now, I work with turmeric generally in a lot higher doses that is likely found in your turmeric lattes, but by no means does that mean, you know, you shouldn't have a turmeric latte. It's a great alternative. And I work with patients in a lot higher doses to really reduce that inflammation, which can help to support weight loss and support healthy endometrial function as well. Shisandra, as I was saying before, a liver tonic, I find that always a component when we're talking about hormones. The liver plays a huge role in our hormone production. So we really want to be supporting detoxification pathways and the elimination of those xenoestrogens that I was talking about, and your regular estrogens. You really want to be metabolizing and excreting those well, so you're not getting that buildup of estrogen, particularly in endometriosis, which can worsen the condition and have negative impact for weight as well. So omega-3, again, reduces inflammation. Again, good fats are great for fertility and great for weight loss as well. They help us feel fuller for longer. They're involved in all our cell walls, so including some omega-3 in the ways of salmon is a great source, obviously one of your highest sources, but any sorts of fish. And particularly when you're looking at fish, best to go for your smaller fish as much as possible instead of your larger fish like flake and swordfish. When it comes to fish, the bigger fish eat the smaller fish. So generally they have a higher mercury load than the smaller fish, like your trouts and your salmon. So if you are going to have fish, you know, particularly when you're pregnant, I mean, they recommend flake no more than once a week. And your swordfish and your fish like that, which may have high levels of mercury. So opt for your trouts and your salmons and your smaller fish and your sardines if you want to go that small as well. They generally have a high omega-3 value and they have a lower level of mercuries and things like that as well. Calendula is another herb which is anti-inflammatory and lymphatic and cleansing. We really want to be getting that lymphatic system moving, getting the blood flowing to the uterus, getting that cleansing happening within the reproductive system is another herb that I use as well. Dong Quai, again, supports blood flow to the reproductive system, which is what we're really wanting, to get that blood flowing healthily. It's a uterine tonic and it can help regulate menstrual cycles. And a lot of women with endometriosis will have menstrual cycles, but they do have that very heavy bleeding and clotting. So really wanting to be supporting that as well. And ladies' mantle is another herb that is used a lot for that. It's astringent, anti-hemorrhagic properties, because it does help with that excess blood flow and excess blood clotting. And vitamin D deficiency, I see that almost across the board in most patients, but it is particularly associated with inflammatory conditions like endometriosis. So I always get vitamin D levels checked in nearly all of my patients, and most people are deficient. So really want to be getting those checked if you are looking at falling pregnant. Now, I'll throw this diet, like I probably haven't even mentioned all of the diets here that are on the market. There are so many out there, and I think this can be the confusing thing about both weight loss and fertility. I mentioned low GI, you know, low GL, low carb. There are a lot of overlaps in a lot of these diets, but what do they all mean, and which is best for fertility? And look, that really is dependent on your unique situation. And I have used a mix of all of these diets in different patients for different reasons when I look at their hormone profile, look at their hormone tests, and what is best for them. But if you're wanting a general diet that most people will improve their fertility on, you can't go past this one, the Mediterranean diet. And it's really it's not the Italian diet the way we have it in Australia of pizza pasta. I was fortunate enough to spend some time in Italy last year for a friend that got married over there. And it was a real epiphany for me to see the way the Mediterraneans do eat. I've obviously heard that Mediterranean diet is beneficial, but to see it in action, and to see it in action in these little towns, why it is so beneficial is there is an emphasis on plant-based foods. Like we were talking about reducing the red meat, which is inflammation. There is such an emphasis on plant-based foods. They have a plentiful supply of fruits and vegetables in their diet. And in fact, every spare patch of land, you know, that I saw had an olive tree or had a lemon tree. It was very much about seasonal eating of their fruits and vegetables. It was very much direct from the source. I don't know if they go to shopping centres at all. Everything was picked from the backyard from their nans. Olive oils. There was a focus on nuts and legumes and using whole grains. And I noticed there wasn't as much pasta as we do have in our Italian foods here. And also their grains are more whole grains. We have a lot more, our flour has a lot higher gluten content than the flours in Italy, just because by the way it's made and processed. So you'll find if you don't get as bloated over in Italy by eating their pasta, that's generally why. They do generally use whole grains. We do have like a lot more refined carbohydrates here in Australia. So olive oils, nuts and legumes are also very high, and it is low in salt and red meat. So a Mediterranean diet in general actually does encompass some of that slow carb, low GI, low GL, encompasses a lot of those other diets within it as well. So Mediterranean is one of the most studied foods. The other thing I like to look at is not just what you're eating, but how you're eating plays a big role in whether you are actually absorbing the nutrients, whether you are feeling full after a meal. And this is a big thing when it comes to weight loss, is being aware of what you're eating and actually focusing on enjoying your food and actually absorbing the nutrients and having that reach your brain as well. Because I think you can see, I love this picture here. It's, I mean, I'd love to be having a picnic out, looking over that vista where he is now. I'm sure I will absorb far more from my food than if I was sitting where most of us are probably likely to be sitting. But we really aren't paying attention to what's going into our body. We're focusing, whether it's a conversation with someone else, whether it's looking at our phone. So we really want to be actually focusing on what we are eating, because that makes a big difference on our body's ability to actually recognize that we're full. Again, talking about the hormones like leptin and things like that, we actually need the body to realize that we've eaten. And it can take about 20 minutes for the body to actually catch up to the fact that we have eaten a meal. It doesn't automatically go straight up there. We actually have to, and chewing our food well, actually getting those digestive juices flowing, makes a huge difference to how full we feel after a meal. I'm sure we've all probably been there and, you know, race through breakfast and you barely realize you've even eaten. And it can take a while for that brain to catch up. And often by the time it does, you actually feel overfull and you feel a bit bloated. But at the time you ate too much because you weren't really paying attention to what you're eating. And I often do a diet diary with patients, which comes back, you know, really glossy, probably for my benefit, a little over exaggerated, but I always focus on how they're eating it. Are they grabbing breakfast on the run? Are they eating lunch beside their desk? Or like this lady is here, at least she's gone to a cafe and sitting down, but away from her desk, but still checking the phone. So a lot of the time we eat sort of on autopilot. And our brain has two types of attention. It has top-down attention, where we are, I guess, actively involved in deciding what we are paying attention to. And we have bottoms-up attention, where we are functioning mechanically and we're almost working unconsciously. And I guess these different types of attention are very important, and we need both of the types of attention to really filter all of the information that is thrown at us, particularly in today's high-paced world. So a lot of the things that we do, like even driving a car or riding a bike, we can do with bottoms-up attention because we don't need to pay attention so much because we know how to do it. We've done it for so long. It is something we can do on autopilot. And unfortunately, when it comes to eating, this is something that we're able to do by bottoms-up attention. It's a simple activity we can simply do, but it's really important to pay attention. When your brain is actively engaged, your stomach and your brain is actually going to receive a stronger signal to show that you are full. So what you want to really be doing is focusing on preparing your body. So ideally, you know, I recommend a teaspoon of apple cider vinegar and some warm water about 20 minutes before a meal. Helps to prepare your body and say, hey, I'm going to eat, get those digestive juices flowing so I can actually absorb some of these nutrients. Be mindful of the food you're choosing to eat. Take note of the, you know, the colors and the textures and the smell, and be very involved in what you're eating. Focus on enjoying your food and don't rush, and even more so pause. I know this might be something that we rarely do these days, but really taking a pause between bites, between meals, to enjoy what you're actually eating. Your brain is going to get a stronger signal to say that you are full. You are definitely going to get a stronger response or a stronger sense of satiety and fullness if you sit and enjoy a meal, you prepare for the meal, you smell the meal. You're getting all the senses for your brain to absorb and absorb all the nutrients for one. So you're getting a maximum intake of all your nutrients, and you're getting that leptin being released. And leptin is actually what's telling our brain that, hey, you've eaten enough, you're full. So we really want to be paying attention to what we're eating. And I've got a guide to that, which we put in the link there, which is a mindful eating ebook, because I think it's so important to do some of these things. But I guess, you know, I've probably covered a lot of information today, but I like to, you know, narrow this down to some simple steps that you can take away to actually start implementing straight away. Oops, skipping on there. So I guess my top tips are lots of brightly coloured fruits and vegetables. Like I was saying before, the more nutrition we can provide, the less cravings we're going to get because our body's going to be satisfied. So lots of brightly coloured fruits and vegetables, like your superfoods. And again, there's a list in the link of superfoods for fertility. Choose organic wherever possible, reduce the pesticide load, or look at the clean 15 and dirty dozen if you can't get organic all the time. Reduce or avoid gluten and dairy, particularly in endometriosis, but that does go across the board for fertility. That can lighten the load on the system. Reduce red meat in most cases. Again, there are some patients where this is necessary, but reduce your intake of red meat and increase your fish and vegetarian protein sources in preference. Follow the low GI and low GL principles. Again, I'm not big on calorie counting and looking at low GI books and things like that. It's not sustainable in my opinion, but look at the principles and look at how much fat and fiber and how whole the grains you are eating is. And avoid storing foods and drinks in plastics. So again, avoiding that pesticide load and that plastics load again. So hopefully that's covered a few things of why weight affects fertility, and as well as providing you with some tools and tips on how you can overcome some of those issues to improve your weight loss and your fertility.
Thank you, Tasha. Now, I guess whilst we give everyone the opportunity to gather some questions and come up with a few, I will actually share with everyone next month's webinar. So I will show with you next month's webinar is with Scott Schmarin on weight loss, the hypnotic difference. So I'd really like to see everyone there on Tuesday, the 12th of June, and that is in the morning because there will be a bit of a time difference. So looking forward to definitely seeing everyone at that one. So look, I guess what I'll start with is a couple of questions I have for you. So you mentioned before that you run a program called Fertility for You, and it works with individuals and couples over a 90-day cycle. Can you tell us a little bit, I guess, about how that works?
Yeah, that's something I'm particularly passionate about, as in the 90-day cycle is the life cycle of the egg. So from an immature follicle to a mature egg ready for release at ovulation takes around 90 days. And it's during these 90 days that you can have a significant impact on the health of that egg that is released at ovulation, which not only obviously improves your chances of conceiving, but studies are now showing that the nutrition you provide in, I call it the pre-trimester, as that's why I really love working with people in that pre-trimester, and the nutrition you provide and the nourishment you provide can actually have a greater impact on the health and well-being and the long-term disease predisposition of your child than your genetics. Now you have the opportunity to actually switch genes on and off in some respect and actually improve genetic predispositions during those 90 days. So that's why it's a 90-day program. So I work with, generally it's women, but often the couples as well. And I work with them on both the sperm and egg health over those 90 days. I work with IVF specialists, so that makes sure that, okay, when they are getting the egg collection happening, that they're getting the healthiest eggs possible, which is what we all want. We really, if you're trying through IVF, you really want it to work first time round for emotional and financial reasons as well. So I help to prepare the body and prepare the egg to get the healthiest egg possible. And obviously, if you're trying to conceive naturally, I work with finding their fertile window, working with more than 90 days to improve that egg quality, to help them successfully conceive, and also their uterine health and other factors as well. But that 90-day period is so important. I think so many women focus on, you know, once I get pregnant, I will be healthy, I'll take my vitamins and I'll eat really healthy. But it's actually the 90 days prior to conception that play a greater role in the health of your future baby than anything you do after. So yeah, so I love to work with women in that pre-trimester. I think we spend ages, you know, preparing the baby's nursery when you're pregnant, but the most important nursery your baby will ever have is the one inside you. So I love working with women to help prepare that and seeing their babies. So that's the Fertility for You program. Yeah.
Wow, that's really amazing work. So you also mentioned you're releasing your Fertile Pantry course in July. So could you tell us a little bit about that and how do our viewers pre-register?
Yes, that's probably something that's particularly relevant to people watching today, I guess, in that it's something that I kind of developed by the questions I was getting asked in my programs, and I have a Conceive Baby with Tasha Jennings Facebook group that people can join, and just the questions I was getting in there, the messages I was getting, I was seeing the same things pop up. So I've created this course and I'm getting more feedback from people in the group. So if you want some input and what you want to hear about, jump over into the group. But basically that it teaches you and how to create a fertile pantry, which is so important for not only conception, but for the future health of your baby. So I go through, you know, sample menu plans, recipes, food lists, how to read labels, what to shop for in the supermarket, key nutrients, how to get them. So really cover all your basics and more, similar to what we did today, but in a lot more detail and a lot more hands-on that you can follow and you can do. And there's a lot of resources in there as well. So I'm in the process of creating that at the moment. They can pre-register at tashajennings.com.au and go to the Your Fertile Pantry page. I've also got a 5 days to improve fertility course, which I'm releasing hopefully in the coming weeks, which will be a free course they can do as well. And you can find all those details at tashajennings.com.au and pre-register for those.
All right, excellent. Thank you. Well, seeing as we don't, oh, actually, we do have a question. So we do. One of our viewers has asked, how do we contact you to do consultations? So I guess what I can do is go to our final slide, which does have your contact details. So as we spoke about Facebook, you've also got Twitter, your 2 websites, your email address, and obviously those free ebooks as well. So we've got all those details there for you to contact Tasha once the webinar is done. Is there anything else you'd like to add, I guess, before we conclude?
Look, that's probably the main thing, and I guess what I'd like to do is congratulate everyone who's listening. I love seeing people being proactive in their fertility health and really, nourishing their future baby, because you are already carrying all the precious DNA that has the potential to become your future baby. So the nourishing and the nurturing really doesn't start when you fall pregnant. It doesn't start when your baby arrives. It really starts now. And I really want to congratulate you for being involved and listening to webinars like this to start nurturing that future baby now.
Well, thank you, Tasha. That does conclude our webinar interview today. So I would like to thank everyone for taking the time to be a part of today's event. And also special thanks to you, Tasha, for taking the time to share your knowledge and experience with all of our listeners. Now, I really look forward to catching up with everyone again for our next expert interview with Scott Schmarin at 10 a.m. on Tuesday, the 12th of June. Thank you.
Thanks.